She hid beneath heavy, frayed wool, silently bearing the cruel laughter of her pack. They called her a deformed outcast, a monster unworthy of a mate. But when the ruthless Alpha King descended from the capital, he didn't see a monster. He smelled destiny. And when he finally pulled back her hood, hell followed. Deep within the damp, dense pine forests of the Pacific Northwest lay the Silver Crescent Pack, a community built on pride, pedigree, and a rigid, unforgiving hierarchy. In the grand kitchens of the pack house, shrouded in steam and the scent of roasting meats, 22-year-old Madeline Hayes existed as nothing more than a ghost. She scrubbed the heavy cast-iron pots, with hands blistered by lye soap, her head bowed. Regardless of whether she was indoors by the blazing hearth or out in the freezing November rain, Madeline wore a thick, oversized wool cloak. Its heavy hood was perpetually pulled forward, casting her face in deep shadow. It was not a fashion choice. It was a mandate. "Keep your head down, freak," sneered Tyler Lockwood, the pack's arrogant lead warrior, as he deliberately kicked over a bucket of dirty mop water she had just finished filling. The murky liquid spilled across the pristine stone floor Madeline had spent the last hour scrubbing. A chorus of snickers erupted from the doorway. Isabella Sterling, the daughter of the local alpha and the pack's most coveted unmated female, leaned against the doorframe. Her perfectly manicured fingers twirled a lock of golden hair. "Honestly, Tyler, don't stand too close. I hear whatever disease rotted half her face off is contagious. She's lucky my father even lets her sleep in the basement." Madeline didn't speak. She didn't defend herself. She simply reached for the heavy wooden mop and began to clean the mess again. Her silence was her only armor. Beneath the suffocating wool hood lay the source of their disgust. A violent, jagged scar that tore down the left side of her face, starting just above her temple, slicing through her eyebrow, missing her eye by a fraction of an inch, and carving a deep valley all the way down to her jawline. The pack had a story for that scar. The official narrative, spread by Alpha Richard Sterling himself, was that Madeline, as a cowardly and clumsy teenager, had tripped into a ceremonial bonfire during a sacred diplomatic meeting, ruining the treaty and bringing shame to Silver Crescent. But the truth, the cold, bitter reality that Madeline kept locked away in her heart, was far different. 4 years ago, rogue wolves had breached the western border during a festival, while the warriors, including a terrified Tyler, had frozen in panic. Madeline had thrown herself between a snarling rogue and a 6-year-old pup named Finley. The rogue's claws had shredded her face, but she had saved the boy. Because Alpha Richard could not admit his elite guards had failed, while an unranked girl showed true bravery, he twisted the story. He paid off Finley's family to relocate, branded Madeline a clumsy liability, and ordered her to cover her face so as not to disturb the aesthetic of the pack. She was stripped of her rank, denied the chance to attend the mating ceremonies, and reduced to the lowest servant. The heavy oak doors of the kitchen suddenly swung open, silencing Isabella's mocking laughter. Alpha Richard Sterling marched in, his face flushed with a mixture of stress and self-importance. "Listen to me, all of you," Richard barked, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. "I just received a missive from the capital. Alpha King Alaric Blackwood is making a regional tour. He will be arriving here in 3 days to inspect our borders and attend the Winter Solstice Gala." A collective gasp swept through the kitchen. The Alpha King, Alaric Blackwood, was a legend, a sovereign known for his lethal efficiency in battle and his zero-tolerance policy for corruption. He was also fiercely unmarried, a fact that instantly made Isabella stand straighter, a predatory gleam entering her eyes. "The king expects perfection," Richard continued, his gaze sweeping over the staff, before landing with profound disgust on Madeline, who was huddled by the sink. "Everything must be immaculate, and you," he pointed a thick, rings-adorned finger at her, "you are not to be seen. You will not serve the high tables. You will not walk the main corridors. If the king catches even a glimpse of your hideous face, I will banish you to the rogue lands myself. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Alpha," Madeline whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "Good. Isabella, come with me. We need to select your wardrobe for the gala." As the kitchen cleared, leaving Madeline alone with the cold mop water and the deafening silence, she pulled her hood tighter around her face. She didn't care about the Alpha King. Kings and Alphas were all the same in her eyes, arrogant men who ruled by fear and vanity. All she had to do was survive the next few days in the shadows, just as she always did. But fate, it seemed, had a very different plan. 3 days later, the air around the Silver Crescent pack house crackled with an oppressive, heavy energy. The arrival of Alpha King Alaric Blackwood was not just an event, it was a shift in the atmosphere. The temperature seemed to drop, and every wolf in the territory felt the primal urge to bare their throats in submission. A convoy of sleek, black SUVs crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway. From the lead vehicle stepped Alaric Blackwood. He was a towering figure, radiating a dark, quiet lethality. Dressed in a sharply tailored black suit that did nothing to hide the broad, muscular build of a battle-hardened warrior, his piercing amber eyes scanned the welcoming party. Beside him stood his beta, Gideon Cross, a man with cold, calculating eyes, holding a thick dossier on the Silver Crescent pack. Alpha Richard and his daughter Isabella stood at the front of the steps, bowing deeply. Isabella had drenched herself in expensive jasmine perfume, wearing a crimson dress meant to catch the king's eye. "Welcome, King Alaric. Our humble home is yours," Richard grovelled. Alaric barely nodded. He hated these tours. He hated the superficial pleasantries, the overly perfumed women throwing themselves at him, and the greedy alphas trying to curry favour. For 5 years he had searched for his destined mate, the other half of his soul, to help him rule the continent. But with each passing year, his wolf grew more restless, more feral. He was here strictly to investigate rumours of embezzlement and border mismanagement within Richard's territory. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Richard." Alaric's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down the spines of the pack members. "I want to see the ledger books by tonight, after the banquet." Inside, the grand dining hall was a spectacle of excess. Crystal chandeliers blazed, and tables groaned under the weight of roasted venison, glazed pheasant, and imported wines. Down in the subterranean kitchens, the situation was disastrous. One of the head Omegas, overwhelmed by the stress, had fainted from exhaustion. They were desperately short-handed, and the main course for the high table, the king's table, needed to be served immediately. The head chef, a frantic older man named Thomas, grabbed Madeline by the arm. "Maddie, you have to run this tray up. Just the side entrance. Slip in, drop the silver cloche on the serving station, and get out. Nobody will notice you in the rush." "But the Alpha ordered," Madeline began, panic rising in her chest. "The Alpha will execute me if the king's food gets cold," Thomas hissed, shoving a massive, heavy silver tray into her hands. "Keep your hood down. Go." Trembling, Madeline pushed through the swinging servant doors and navigated the narrow, dimly lit service corridor. The noise from the banquet hall was deafening. Laughter, the clinking of crystal, the booming voice of Alpha Richard boasting about his pack's wealth. Madeline slipped through the velvet curtains into the back of the dining hall. She kept her chin tucked tightly to her chest, the heavy wool hood falling like a curtain around her face. She moved quickly and silently toward the serving station, praying to the moon goddess to remain invisible. At the head table, Alaric was nursing a glass of bourbon, ignoring Isabella, who was leaning over his shoulder, desperately trying to force a conversation. Alaric's wolf was agitated. The air in the room was too thick, filled with greed and cheap floral perfumes. Suddenly a scent cut through the room. It was faint at first. Rain-soaked pine, sweet vanilla, and the sharp tang of old paper. Alaric froze. His amber eyes snapped wide, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. His wolf, which had been dormant and brooding for years, suddenly roared to life inside his mind. "Mate, He sat up rigidly, his gaze sweeping the crowded room. Where was it coming from? Near the serving station, Madeline was just setting down the heavy silver tray. She turned to retreat into the shadows, but Isabella, frustrated by the king's total lack of interest, had stepped away from the table to grab another bottle of wine. She spotted the hooded figure. Spite flared in Isabella's eyes. She recognized the frayed wool cloak immediately. Disobeying orders, was she? Isabella subtly shifted her weight and, as Madeline hurried past, kicked her stiletto heel directly into Madeline's ankle. Madeline pitched forward with a gasp. She managed to catch herself on the edge of a mahogany side table, preventing a full collapse. But her elbow struck a stack of crystal water goblets. They tumbled to the marble floor with a deafening crash, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. The entire banquet hall fell dead silent. The music stopped. Every eye turned to the servant in the heavy hood, kneeling among the broken glass. The scent, vanilla and rain, bloomed violently in the air, washing over the high table. Alaric stood up so fast his heavy oak chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor. Beta Gideon immediately dropped his hand to his holstered weapon, sensing the sudden chaotic spike in his king's aura. Alpha Richard turned purple with rage. "You!" he bellowed, storming toward Madeline. "But what are you doing up here? I told you to stay in the dark where you belong." Isabella laughed a high, cruel sound. "Oh, apologies, King Alaric. It's just one of our bottom feeders. She's clumsy, deformed, and frankly a bit slow in the head. We try to keep the hideous thing out of sight, so she doesn't ruin people's appetites." Madeline was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. She scrambled backwards, her hands scraping against the broken glass. A sharp shard sliced her palm, drawing a bright bead of blood. The scent of her distress and her blood hit Alaric like a physical blow. He didn't look at Isabella. He didn't look at Richard. Alaric vaulted over the massive dining table, his boots hitting the marble floor with a terrifying thud. He stalked toward the kneeling figure, his chest heaving, his amber eyes locked entirely on the terrified woman in the frayed hood. Madeline didn't wait. The primal terror of having the Alpha King approaching her, combined with Richard's promised wrath, overrode everything. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest, and bolted for the service doors. "Stop!" Alaric commanded, using his alpha tone. The power in his voice cracked the remaining glasses on the tables and brought 3 full-grown warriors to their knees in pure submission. But Madeline, fueled by sheer adrenaline and a lifetime of running, hit the swinging doors and disappeared into the labyrinth of the packhouse corridors. Alaric stopped at the spot where she had fallen. He looked down at the single drop of blood on a shard of glass. His chest rumbled with a deep, territorial growl that made Alpha Richard take 2 terrified steps backward. "Your Majesty," Richard stammered, sweating profusely, "I am so deeply sorry. That wretched girl will be severely punished for—" Alaric slowly turned his head. His eyes were no longer amber. They were the terrifying, glowing crimson of a fully surfaced Alpha King. "If anyone in this pack lays a single hand on her," Alaric said, his voice deadly quiet, "I will burn this entire territory to ash." He looked at Gideon. "Lock down the borders. Nobody leaves. Find her." The biting wind of the Pacific Northwest whipped through the dense canopy of the Cascade Mountains, carrying the icy promise of a winter storm. Madeline ran until her lungs burned, her boots slipping on the slick, mud-covered roots of ancient pine trees. Her injured palm throbbed, leaving a microscopic trail of blood on the wet ferns. She knew she was hunted. The overwhelming, terrifying aura of a fully dominant Alpha King was expanding through the forest behind her, pressing against the very air she breathed. She sought refuge in the only place she knew, an abandoned, rotting logging cabin perched on the edge of the northern ravine. It was a place the rest of the Silver Crescent pack avoided, claiming it was structurally unsound. For Madeline, it had been a sanctuary from their cruelty. She hurled herself through the broken doorframe, collapsing into the dusty corner. Shivering uncontrollably, she pulled her knees to her chest and dragged her frayed wool hood further down her face, trembling in the dark. Outside, the forest went completely silent. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind seemed to hold its breath. A shadow, broad and imposing, eclipsed the moonlight filtering through the doorway. Alaric Blackwood stepped into the ruined cabin. He had discarded his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, clinging to his muscular frame. His amber eyes pierced the gloom, locking instantly onto the small, shivering mass of wool in the corner. "Do not run from me," Alaric commanded. His voice was no longer the deafening roar that had shattered crystal in the banquet hall. It was a low, resonant purr, vibrating with an ancient, possessive instinct. Madeline pressed herself harder into the rotting wood of the wall. "Please," she choked out, her voice raspy and broken. "Please, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to ruin the banquet. Alpha Richard will kill me. Just let me leave the territory. I'll go to the rogue lands." Alaric closed the distance between them in 2 fluid strides, dropping to his knees on the filthy floorboards. He didn't care about the dust or the dampness seeping into his trousers. He only cared about the agonizing scent of fear radiating from his mate. "Nobody is going to kill you," Alaric said softly, extending a large, calloused hand. "And you are certainly not going to the rogue lands. You belong to me." Madeline froze, her breath catching in her throat. I am a servant, a deformed outcast. You don't know what you're saying." "My wolf knows exactly what I am saying," Alaric replied, his fingers hovering mere inches from her face. "May I?" She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear escaping and tracking down her chin. For 4 years, any hand that reached for her face was meant to strike her or pull her hood away to mock her. But the king's hand was steady, radiating a comforting, intense heat. Slowly, hesitantly, Madeline gave a microscopic nod. Alaric's fingers curled into the heavy wool. With agonizing slowness, he pushed the hood back, letting it fall to her shoulders. The moonlight illuminated her face. He saw the jagged, violent scar instantly. It was a brutal testament to trauma, slicing through her eyebrow, missing the eye by a hair's breadth, and carving a deep, ragged canyon down her pale cheek to her jawline. The surrounding tissue was puckered and uneven. Madeline turned her face away, a sob tearing from her throat. "Don't look at it. I know it's a monster's face. They tell me every day." Alaric did not flinch. He did not pull back in disgust. Instead, a low, dangerous growl rumbled deep in his chest, not directed at her, but at the memory of whatever had dared to harm his queen. He gently cupped her chin, forcing her to look back at him. His thumb brushed featherlight over the scarred tissue. "A monster's face," Alaric murmured, his eyes blazing with a mixture of reverence and simmering fury. "This is not the mark of a clumsy girl falling into a bonfire, Madeline," she gasped, her eyes flying open. "How do you know my name?" "My beta is highly efficient," Alaric replied grimly. Back at the pack house, chaos had descended. Beta Gideon had not just locked down the borders, he had raided Alpha Richard's private office. More importantly, Gideon had cornered Dr. Harrison Miller, the aging, terrified pack physician. Pressed against a wall by the king's heavily armed royal guard, Dr. Miller had completely cracked. He confessed everything, handing over his hidden, encrypted medical files. Alaric looked deeply into Madeline's eyes. "My beta just informed me over the mind link of what Dr. Harrison Miller confessed. He told me about the rogue attack 4 years ago. He told me about a fearless, unranked girl who threw herself in front of a lethal predator to save a 6-year-old boy named Finley. He told me how Richard forced him to falsify the medical logs to cover up the incompetence of his own elite warriors." Madeline stared at him, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The secret she had carried in agonizing silence for years, the truth that had cost her her dignity, her rank, and her face, was finally known. "You didn't fall into a fire, my brave mate," Alaric whispered, leaning in until his forehead rested gently against hers. "You earned a warrior's brand, and the fact that they made you hide it in shame is a crime I will punish with blood." He stood up, pulling Madeline effortlessly to her feet, He unbuttoned his crisp white shirt, taking it off completely, revealing a chest covered in his own faded battle scars before wrapping it warmly around her trembling shoulders. "Come with me, Madeline," Alaric said, his voice hardening into pure, unyielding steel. "It is time to return to the banquet." The atmosphere in the grand dining hall was suffocating. Alpha Richard paced frantically in front of the high table, chewing his lip, while Isabella sat with her arms crossed, her perfect face contorted in a bitter scowl. The visiting dignitaries and the entire Silver Crescent pack were seated in absolute, terrified silence, flanked by the king's royal guard, whose hands rested menacingly on their holstered weapons. The heavy oak doors of the banquet hall blew open with a deafening crash, splintering against the stone walls. Alaric Blackwood strode into the room, bare-chested, radiating a terrifying, lethal dominance that forced every werewolf in the room to lower their eyes. Beside him, clutching his oversized shirt around her frame, was Madeline. Her hood was gone. Her face, and the brutal scar that marred it, was fully exposed to the light of the crystal chandeliers. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Isabella jumped to her feet, her mask of civility slipping entirely. "Your Majesty, what are you doing with that creature? She is diseased. She is an embarrassment to—" "Silence!" Alaric roared. The sheer force of his alpha command hit the room like a physical shockwave. Isabella's knees buckled, and she collapsed hard onto the marble floor, gasping for air as the invisible weight of the king's aura crushed her pride. Alaric led Madeline to the high table, guiding her to stand at the absolute center of the room. He turned to face Alpha Richard, who was now trembling visibly, a cold sweat breaking out across his brow. "Alpha Richard Sterling." Alaric's voice was dangerously calm, echoing through the silent hall. "For 5 years I have searched for a mate worthy of sitting beside me on the throne. I expected to find strength. I expected to find honor. Instead, in your territory, I found a pack of cowards hiding behind the courage of a single, unranked female." Richard stammered, raising his hands. "My king, I don't understand. She is just a clumsy servant. The bonfire—" "Beta Gideon!" Alaric barked. From the shadows, Gideon stepped forward, dragging a sobbing Dr. Harrison Miller by the collar. Gideon tossed a thick stack of medical files onto the dining table. "Dr. Miller has been very cooperative," Gideon announced loudly. "He provided the original medical charts from the night of the Western border breach 4 years ago. The wounds on Madeline Hayes's face are unequivocally categorized as defensive lacerations from a lycanthrope claw, sustained while shielding a juvenile. Furthermore, we have already located Finley and his family in the neighboring territory. They are currently en route to testify against you, Richard." The murmurs that swept through the pack were instantaneous. Shock, guilt, and dawning horror painted the faces of the pack members who had spent years mocking the girl they thought was a clumsy fool. Tyler Lockwood, the lead warrior who had kicked over Madeline's mop bucket, turned ash white, realizing his own cowardice during that rogue attack was about to be laid bare. "You allowed your warriors to cower while she bled," Alaric stated, taking a slow, predatory step toward Richard. "You bought the silence of a victim's family. You forced a hero to live in a dark basement and hide her scars because they bruised your pathetic ego." Richard dropped to his knees. "Mercy, Your Majesty. I did it for the reputation of the pack, to show weakness." "To show weakness is exactly what you did," Alaric interrupted coldly. "By the authority of the royal crown, I strip you of your alpha title. You, your daughter Isabella, and your lead warrior Tyler Lockwood are hereby banished to the frozen northern wastes. If you ever set foot in a civilized territory again, you will be executed on sight." Isabella shrieked, a horrific sound of absolute despair, as 2 royal guards hauled her roughly to her feet by her expensive crimson dress. Tyler didn't even fight. He hung his head as he was dragged away. Alaric turned his back on the disgraced former alpha. He walked back to Madeline, who was standing tall, tears streaming down her unscarred cheek. For the first time in 4 years, she didn't feel the urge to hide. The heavy weight of the pack's judgment was gone, replaced by the awe of the surrounding wolves. Alaric knelt before her, taking her small, rough hands in his massive ones. He looked up at her, his amber eyes softening with an emotion that no one in the kingdom had ever seen him display. "They laughed at your scar, Madeline," Alaric said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "But they were too blind to see that it was a crown. You are the bravest soul I have ever encountered. You are my mate, my equal, and the true queen of this realm." He brought her bleeding palm to his lips, kissing the wound gently, before standing up and pulling her into a fierce, protective embrace. As his lips met hers, a brilliant, burning sensation erupted along Madeline's collarbone, the mating mark, sealing their bond. She wasn't the outcast of Silver Crescent anymore. She was Madeline Blackwood, the scarred queen, and she would never wear a hood again. Did the Alpha King's ruthless justice and Madeline's incredible rise to power give you chills? If you loved this dramatic tale of hidden courage and fated mates, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, leave a comment telling us your favorite plot twist and share it with your fellow romance lovers. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more thrilling werewolf stories every single week.